spoken about RAG with OpenAI. We've covered a couple of topics. My name is Johan Meiberg, and I'm a technical trainer with Microsoft in the UK. So welcome to our session that we co-host with our reactive folks. As per usual, just to remind you of the code of conduct, always be aware, always be patient, welcoming, and respectful. It's important, and then of course make the most of it, right? If you have questions, we'll leave for some questions towards the end. If we don't get you the answers, you're more than welcome to reach out to me as well on something like LinkedIn. You'll probably find my profile there quite easy if you just search for Johan Meiberg Microsoft. It's probably going to come up. That said, if you just go to akka.ms/Johan, it'll also work. Right, but enough about that now. So we've got a brief sort of agenda that we're going to work through. Right, we're going to start with a recap of what we've covered up until now. Remember, this is the third session in a series of sessions where we cover retrieval augmented generation, right, or RAG, as I'm going to be referring to it from now on. So what we're going to first just recap, then we're going to identify what it is, and in identifying what it is, I'm going to do a demo that's available right now for you using this type of service and capability. Then we will spend a little bit of time looking at why it's important to have an index, right? An index of sorts. Or, we'll look at some of the code behind it as well, right? I'm definitely going to spend a couple of minutes just looking at the code, and then we're going to spend some time around the what's new sort of scenario. There's a couple of additional capabilities and features that appeared very, very recently, and I want to just discuss a couple of these things. So, for example, identity, right? There's a new identity model involved now, so you don't have to use keys to authenticate. And I think it's worth mentioning something like that. Right, folks. So let's get cracking here. First of all, the recap, as you might remember, in the first two sessions we spoke about OpenAI, the models, how to deploy these models. And we spoke and touched quite a bit on prompt engineering, right? And how that prompt engineering is essentially going to set out your interaction with these models to build whatever you want them to build, right? It's about getting them to respond the way you want them to respond. And unfortunately, part of this is a rehashing process. And I think this is one of the key aspects of what you need to get right in your applications here is the concept of iteration, right? You need to be able to get your user to iterate easily without having to, for example, retype the entire query, right? And I think this predominantly becomes a where is my mouse? There we go. So this is a part of the user experience that I believe is hugely underestimated and undervalued in terms of success towards driving this into your business, right? If a user has to retype whatever they are typing, you're missing the idea here. You should be catering for at least allowing the user to tweak whatever they have typed, for example, or to select from something that says just replay, something like that. And I'll show you how Microsoft has actually achieved that in some of our applications and services. All right, so that, of course, leaves you to interact with some sort of an orchestrator, an application server, if you like, maybe a web server that does something. And your application is going to then, on its side, going to be able to interact and communicate with this OpenAI service, while at the same time specifying that it's going to provide some input from the Azure AI service. So let me explain that in simple terms. What generally happens if we have to cut out that entire AI service, right, the AI search service, what will happen is this information will come from public knowledge, right? It's public data, right? If you look at something like GPT-4, this is not personal, private, internal information. This is public information. So if you cut Azure Search out of the picture, then you're really only sitting with crafting responses and prompts around public data, right? Now, what we want to do is we want to be able to bring in our own data, of course, and that's really what RAG is all about. RAG is about bringing your own data and showing how your data can be used as a base for generating the information. So, for example, and I thought, as I mentioned here, this is what today is all about. It's about this. It's about RAG, and if we look at what it is, we're talking about large language models that are generally built on public information. Whereas what you really want is you really want them to be able to integrate with your private data, right? So, well, how do we do this? Generally, we bring an index. There's also other ways of doing this. There is a public URL upload type option that we can also use now. So you can bring blobs directly from I think it's this Azure storage account, right? But generally, for most of the backend services that you might want to use, you're probably going to use an index, and that index is going to come from our search service, right? Our search service, as we mentioned the last time, has got this great variety of sources that it can pull information in from, and it can pull in that information and then almost classify that information. Remember, we said that the search service augments our index with additional information like language, what is the intent, OCRing of images and things like that, and all that metadata is then essentially becoming part of your index. And that's what makes your index so rich, not necessarily your data. The fact that our search index can also index all that other, cognitive information that is available from that data set, right? And then include this in the results that's coming back from the large language model, right? So that's the idea, is to say, well, we don't want you to generate information based on public information. We want you to generate, the same sort of your same types of messages, but base it on our data, not necessarily the data that's based in the public domain. So, like I said, the best way to show this is to actually show you a demo of how we've built some of this into some of our products. So I'm going to start at the end here, and then we're going to work our way back. I want you to take a look at this document here. This is a document that I've got. That I've had available for in my OneDrive location, right? And you'll notice that basically, if I hit the sharing button there and say copy the link for this one, I can copy that link, and it's copied the link. Now take a look at this option. This is our PowerPoint template. Now, just looking at this information, you can see that this is financial results, right? Again, and I think I've mentioned this a few times, what you don't want is you don't want a scenario where your end user is expecting these models to generate everything. The expectation should be that it's only going to do the heavy lifting, right? So if someone asks me today to generate a PowerPoint from this information, I'll probably start thinking of breaking it down by year or something like that, kind of flesh it out. What we can do is we can spin up a blank presentation there, and we can say to the Copilot, create a presentation from my data. And this is exactly what we are doing, right? Paste that link in there, and it's effectively looking over this document, and it's generating its response now, not based on public information, right? It's basing this response on my data. And this is what we are referring to, folks, right? We are referring to the ability to incorporate this into applications with our own data so that we can use it to be more effective. And that's really the idea, right? And it's busy churning out a huge amount of slides here now, but you'll see these slides are not just going to be copies of the table. These slides will be just like I thought, sort of, 2019, 2020, and a bunch of other options. It is taking its time here, but this is what we are referring to when we say RAG. Bring your own data, and we will go and use that large language model that's so effective at generating content that that it will do all the heavy lifting for you. There you can see introduction. There's a nice little intro to everything. You can see there's some key figures, right? And pretty much a really good starting point, right? Of course, then you can use something like this, the designer, but that's not the point. But folks, that's what we're referring to, the ability for the model to look at custom data and bring that data in. Right, so let me not save that. So that's I think that as a starting point is a good point to start at, to show you what we mean by this, right? Use the model, point it to your data, and off you go. Of course, you need to be able to do this programmatically as well. So you'll notice that if you just give me a second so that I can crank open Visual Studio Code here. So if I look at calling the OpenAI endpoint inside of Azure, you'll see that what I've got here is I've got essentially that endpoint. This is for a normal completion, right? You can see there I'm sending in a bunch of messages. There's the temperature, all these things we spoke about. And of course, I can go and send that request, and it's going to come back with some sort of result based on that. Now you'll see that there's my result, and happy days, right? We've got the result we were after. But if you look carefully, the parameters here are the standard parameters, right? If I scroll down here, I've got another one where you can see I'm sending it, I think, to a different version of the API there. But what I'm also doing, if I scroll down here, dang, it's not, there we go. There you can see I've also got a data source there, right? Scroll right past that, folks. Sorry. So there you can see, as part of my request, as opposed to just sending the API parameters for OpenAI, there you can see I've got an extra section there, right? And you can see I'm doing a couple of things there. I'm saying that this type of data source, let me just zoom in here. This data source type is Azure Search, right? Which is now going to create the context for the model. And it's going to know what the endpoint is for that search endpoint. So this is the search service that I created, the endpoint I get from that. And then it wants to know what index I want to use. And this index is essentially the index that was created around your source data. So if we enrich that information with all our other AI services like language detection, sentiment analysis, if we check the information for obscene content, all these sort of things, registered any PII information, for example, right, and redacted PII information for that matter, those sort of things. That information lives in that index. In this case, in Margie's knowledge index, right? So if I for example just specify something like this. I want to stay in London for a few days. What do you recommend? Right? And I guess we can go for sort of a, sort of somewhere in the middle type option there. This is talking directly to the OpenAI service now, right? And only to the OpenAI service. It's a little bit slow. There we go. You can see that this is very generic information, right? London is a vibrant city, right? Buckingham Palace, all generic things and no links of any sorts. So if I take this message and I scroll to the bottom here and I remove all these other ones, and I paste that same message now, right? But this time I'm including that knowledge base where I've aggregated this information. Then you'll notice it's going to come back with a whole different set of results. Oopsie. Let me just save this thing and run that again. It's actually now going to look at that index that contains Margie's travel content and material, and it's going to return results from that. So let's just give it a few seconds. And that's what we mean in that diagram when we say we're bringing in that index, right? And that index gives us that capability. There we go. There's at least some action now. It's taking a little bit longer, but of course, it's important that you have that index. If you don't have an index, this might actually be a very long, tedious process, right? So it's busy churning out quite a bit now. That's why it's taking a little bit longer than I expected. Okay, so it's very, very simple. I've added it into a REST query here. It's very, very similar if you were doing something like this from one of our SDKs like C# or from whatever SDK you are actually using at that point in time. It is a little bit too slow for my liking, folks, so I might just leave this for another couple of seconds. And if it doesn't come back with something, then I'll see if I can just come back a little bit later on and show you the result. The result will come back eventually. Oh, there we go. There's something happening now. I'm over-optimistic, as per usual. Am I? Yes, I am. Yes, I am. All right. Well, I'll get back to that. I'll show you the results in a few minutes. All right. So yes, whether you are using the SDK, whether you are using the REST endpoints, it's all available, and I can demonstrate that for you as well by doing what's probably the most simple of demos, right? So you'll notice that I am busy training the Azure developer course this week. So let me just quickly go to my OpenAI service. There's my always on service, and of course there's my OpenAI studio for this. Might as well add that one because I access it so often. So I've shown you now some of the the actual I've shown you the actual REST data, but if I go into the chat here, you will see same sort of scenario if I choose the right model here with all the parameters and whatnot. And I can, of course, go and add my own data. And you'll see from this perspective, and I'll touch on some of these things a little bit later on, but you'll see, for example, I can go and select my data source here. And I've got a search service that I can select. Let's go with that Margie's knowledge index again. You'll notice that you can also implement vector search if you wanted to. In other words, search for meaning and not just for the raw text itself. And then you'll see that we've also got a index field mapping option, and I'll show you what that is. It's a relatively new feature. I think it's been there for about 3 months. Take a look here that I can actually specify the fields that I want to show. If I'm referencing blobs, for example, in the storage account, I can specify that the title must be the title field, the URL must be the URL field, for example. But I can also choose from whatever other metadata and contents available from that specific index. So I can do that if I wanted to do that. I'm actually not going to do that now. There you can see, once again, I can go for either a keyword search, right? In other words, matching keywords. You will notice that this is actually something that we set up in our request as well. So as you send the request through, you're basically specifying the type of search you're going to be using. In other words, this is something that goes through with every single request, folks, not just a once-off configuration. Every time you send it through, you're going to tell it the search type. Otherwise, it's going to default to the default options, right? So you have to be quite specific with that. Doesn't really matter for me which one I choose. It's going to have more or less the same result. Keep in mind that I do need to set up a semantic configuration for this to actually work. That incurs an additional cost, but that implies that as opposed to searching for something like words close to water, right? In the content, if I search for something like with a view of the marina, it will pick up that the view of the marina is close to water, and it'll include those results in my result set. So that's what we mean by a semantic search versus a keyword search, right? So we've got these different options. Now, of course, at this point in time, as I said, it doesn't really matter which one I use. I'll just go with this one. This is one of the new features, and I think it's worth spending a couple of minutes around this actually. It's not going to show like this in the code that'll generate in the portal here. But if you think back to what my code looked like, right, you can see there that the authentication type, let me just make this red. The authentication type is actually system assigned managed identity. The other option we've got, well, there are actually a couple of options, but the other option we've got is to use the account key, right? So that means for the search service, I'm using the search endpoint, and then I'm going to also use a key that was generated from that search service. This is a relatively new feature, but it implies that because we're using what's known as a system assigned managed identity, it means that the service in Azure, the OpenAI service, needs to have access to the search service and needs to have certain roles on that search service, right? And I'll show that to you quickly. If I pop, and this is important because without these, you're not going to be able to set this up. So let's just quickly head back into the portal there. And you'll notice that if I go for my Azure search, well, let's go for OpenAI, that's going to take me there. There's my Azure search service, right? Always on. And you'll notice that if I click on my access control here, this is a new feature, folks, because you'll see if I click on role assignments here, there's going to be one role assignment. There you can see this always on application. Excuse me, it's not really an application. It's actually, this is my OpenAI service, folks. So what this implies, and let me just be clear about this. What we're basically saying is, I've got my search service, party colors, it's Friday, right? I've got my search service, and now I've got my OpenAI service, right? And of course, this is my application. This is my web app that's communicating with the OpenAI service. What we are basically saying is, when I'm communicating with the OpenAI service, I'm telling the service, hey, use this search configuration, right? I send some configuration into the OpenAI service, and the OpenAI service now realizes, hang on, I must integrate my response with this search service, with the index that this request is specifying, right? So it can authenticate either using the endpoint and the key of the search service, or alternatively, we can now use a managed identity. And whoa, hang on, let me rather draw this in a different color. A managed identity. And we've got two types of managed identities, just quick. The one type of managed identity is what's known as a system assigned identity, right? Which can only belong to one resource at a time. And I'll show that to you. This one, if it's called OpenAI, will be called OpenAI as well. That'll be the identity name. But there's also another option called a user-assigned identity, right? And with a user-assigned identity, I can actually group together multiple OpenAI services using my user-assigned identity, whatever this identity is called. This is my user-assigned identity. I can go and associate this identity. Let's call this my, right? I can associate this with multiple applications or multiple services. So you know, my OpenAI as a service can have the same permissions as my. Any other service that I might be creating can also have, you know, the same as identity as my. And then I only have to give that identity access to the search service, versus if I'm using a system assigned identity, each of these will get their own. If this is OpenAI, there will be an access policy there. If this one is called OpenAI number 5, there will be another one for that one. So it really just gives you a little bit of scale in terms of creating a single identity and grouping together multiple OpenAI services and giving them all access to the search service with one policy assignment, as opposed to making multiple policy assignments using that system assigned identity. I would like to show that to you just quickly. So you'll notice that if I, this is my search service. And you can see that this is essentially where my user has got that access, right? That always on option. It says got, you know. And by the way, if I just limit this quickly to always on, then you'll see that the permissions required to use this mechanism of authenticating is search index data reader and search service contributor. If you've created an identity for your OpenAI service, then it's essentially going to require those permissions. Let me show you what I mean by that quickly. If I go to my OpenAI service, there it is, always on. You'll notice that if I scroll down here, there's an identity component here, right? This identity component can, as you can see there, can either be system assigned, which means it gets this object ID, and then when I delete this OpenAI service For the system assigned identity only, this object will get removed from our entra-ID environment altogether, right? If I use user assigned identity, and you can see that this is actually the object that I've given access to that, to that search service. Otherwise, I won't be able to use the managed identity integration, right? Otherwise, it will require a key alongside that endpoint. But there you can see there's user assigned identity, and this is ideal for where maybe we've got a OpenAI service for production. Maybe we've got 5 or 6 OpenAI services for production, so that we can spread the load and get a little bit more token sort of distribution across those, right? And each of those OpenAI services for production is going to have access to the search service. Because we are not writing to this data, you can probably even point your developer and other types of resources to the same sort of index, right? So how do you do this? You add an existing user assigned identity, and there you can see I've got another one called always on. That's an identity, and I can go and assign this to multiple OpenAI services and just give access to the search to that identity, and all those OpenAI services will then have access to the resource. All right. So this is important, folks. It's a new way of doing this. In the past, the only option we supported was using the search service keys. We now also support a managed identity option, which means that the OpenAI service on its own, with its own identity, can communicate with the search index service. All right, I do hope that plays a little bit more towards a better design, I guess. All right, so you can see there we're passing in the search index name, but the reality is there's actually a lot more than these attributes here. We can pass in additional parameters. When we're integrating into the cognitive search extension, we can pass in additional parameters that will, for example, limit the top 5 documents, or there's additional filters that we can actually add to filter information in and out of this. We basically use OData for that. So you can construct the OData query, and that OData query will essentially filter this indexed information even further, so that we can specify exactly what it is that we want, right? So you might be able to specify down to the container or even a file name to say, filter back items and show only items where I've got spreadsheets, for example, XLSX documents, those sort of things. So we've got those filter options available as well, which I think is quite powerful. All right, so folks, I've got a couple of additional things to just go through with you. So first of all, very important, and as per usual, be very aware of where we are supporting these different capabilities. If you start playing with our OpenAI service, you'll notice very quickly that that lots of capabilities are very tightly bound to some of the individual versions of these models, right? So don't discount the fact that you might be developing in a specific region, and then you're going into your production region, and that region doesn't support the services that you thought you were going to support. So always be cognizant about this. Don't deploy on deploy day. I always like to say that, right? Don't deploy when you're deploying on the given day. Make sure that you've deployed a few times before you deploy, so you understand what is available, that you're using those same regions and those same models, right? We're also bringing images to OpenAI. These are some of the new features, right? The ability for you to bring an image and say to the model, well, here's an image. Tell me what brands you see in the model, for example, right? Are there any brands that you recognize in this image, right? So the ability to infer text from these models as well. And I see what a lot of our customers are actually doing. A lot of our customers are providing a little microphone that that essentially allows you to also talk and transcript that conversation onto a text box, for example, right? And you can use our speech service for that as well, which is also a service that will even generate speech if you want to. We did speak about these field mapping options, and we did. I did specify these filters as well, right? Lastly, the languages we support from a semantic search perspective is only these languages. So if it's anything outside of these languages, you're going to have to use that full text search that we spoke about. All right. So just quickly to recap, quite important. We've got that managed identity component. So in the future, the key to authenticate against that search service might not be as important, right? And you can essentially use that managed identity to authenticate there. Just trying to think what else I wanted to demonstrate for you. Right, so I haven't completed this, of course, but you can see there that I can, of course, go and review and finish here. If I didn't have those permissions, this won't succeed, and I'll actually not be able to call this to interact with this. So you'll notice, for example, I've hooked it up now to this to that Margie's knowledge index, and at this point in time, I can go and ask questions about, and this is exactly what I asked in here. Right, maybe it was a little bit difficult to read. So let me just quickly go through that again. And I wanted to just briefly show you this code here. Oh, that's the wrong one. All right, so I want to stay, well, I'll just hang on for a sec. All right, it's always worth just showing it in here. So there you can see, using the standard sort of open model, you might not have seen this a little bit earlier, easily to read in Visual Studio, but there you can see there's a couple of iconic sort of places. This information is public information. I can go and add a data source. I'm adding my data source there to Margie's knowledge base. I'm doing it in the portal here now, of course, but not not programmatically like on the other one. And there you can see Margie's knowledge index. I can select that one, use that custom field mapping if I feel like doing that. Semantic search or keyword search. Let's go for semantic this time. And then I'll hit the next button, use that managed identity, and thank you very much. And at this time, when I ask it the question, it's obviously pointing now towards my new data. So if I clear the chat here and paste that command, it's going to be quite happy to refer to that Margie's knowledge index and base the results on whatever it's getting from that index. Right? So you'll see, hence, there's my references, and these are then links to those individual documents. Right, and you can see all of this information is based on the information in Margie's index that's in that that's in there. There you can see there's a citation, for example, and you can see it's giving me that same information. So if I, for example, say something, and if I wanted to stay near water. There we go. The city hotel is a good choice if you want to stay near water. And then you can see there's also some references. And if I look at this citation, you can see there that it's used tube. I'm not sure. It might actually use the word water here. But tower, hiccup. There's no water in there. You can see there that it basically infers tower bridge. It infers from this. There's There's no water in that document at all. But because they said it was a short walk down to see the boats on the river or whatever the case might be, it's picked up that item, and now it's using the semantic meaning, right? Not necessarily a word search like the one I would have shown you a little bit earlier. All right. So I really, really hope that makes sense, and that in the context that that you can see what we're driving at with this. Now, by the way, if I was to open up our Copilot service, essentially runs against the Microsoft Graph. So for those of you that are not familiar with the Microsoft Graph, there's a Microsoft Graph Explorer. You can see there's the Explorer tool. I just need to remove the preview there. There's the Graph Explorer. Take a look at all this information on the side here, folks. Excel documents, right? Microsoft Teams data, to-do list, notifications, OneDrive, right? What is my latest OneDrive documents? What are my recent OneDrive documents, right? Running a query against this, it's going to show me my users, latest five sort of OneDrive documents. Our Copilot service is hooked up to this. So when you're using the Microsoft Copilot service inside of Office, it's indexed, it's going through the index of this data that you see here, the Microsoft Calendar, your Outlook data, right? Gosh, folks, there's a bunch of things there. There's Windows updates. You want to know what the last 20 Windows updates was on your Windows 11 device? You can ask the Copilot. The Copilot, if it doesn't have access at this point in time, it will probably have access to that soon, because it looks like we're slowly but surely, indexing all this information in the Microsoft Graph in place without moving it from where it is, and we're making this information available through RAG into your Copilot service. That's that's kind of visible from most of our applications at this point in time. So, well worth mentioning that, I guess. All right, folks, and seeing as this is the last part of our conversation, I'm going to just quickly show you that there is essentially some of the Python code, right? So you can see there that there's a class bring your own data adapter, and you can see that I'm specifying the deployments and things like that. And you'll see, where is it now? There you can see Azure Search, right? This is a semantic search, right? It's not a text search, right? And you can see all this information in there. There you can see another couple of options, right? Field mapping, right? What is in scope, what's not in scope, a couple of additional options. If I go to the JSON option here, you will see that again, we describe that connection in our code, and folks, this goes through every single time. There's no ways to instruct it that every time we make a call to the API that it's gonna include this data. You need to include and inject this information into every single request that's going back where you want data coming back from the service. All right. It's not a once-off thing, just like your system message, right, which we spoke about, right? The system message. You're an AI assistant. There's my system message. Just like that, we are going to send through this index information through every single request, because that's going to include the results from the index. So every request you make through to this service. All right. Other than that, I thought because it's our last session, let's see if we can answer some additional questions. So I'm going to just summarize quickly for us. We spoke today about the RAG process using Azure OpenAI. We spoke about the new capability with permissions and access, where we can use a role-based a role-based identity and a managed identity service to give my OpenAI service direct access to the search index and the search service, right? And we also spoke about a couple of additional features like custom field mapping, filters, and then the differences between the semantic and the keyword search. Effectively, though, the result of all of this is that that you can essentially build applications that integrate this information and whatever other types of data, all the data sources that we can feed into Azure AI Search into your responses. But keep in mind that this is not something that you might want to be doing all the time, right? So in certain instances, you might want that public knowledge and that public index data as opposed to bringing the data back from your own backend data. And I think that we've actually done this quite effectively with this tool over here. Right, so if I open this up, my Copilot for Bing, you'll see that we've got two sections here, a work option and a web option, right? So this is really obviously just a toggle because I'm signed in with my profile here, right? It knows who I am, and it's got access to my work data, and it can actually run some of that large language models up against my work-related data, my email, and a bunch of other things that you see within that Microsoft Graph information, right? So really, if you think about it, this is just a toggle that we've built in here, which injects that additional search configuration section that allows us to bring back results from our work environment. And that is why I can essentially ask questions like this. What further calls do I have today? And it's going to come back from my calendar and it's going to tell me what calls I've got from today. Last thing I wanted to also point out, folks, and I'm going to use Microsoft Word to do this. All right, so it's an Alt-I, or you can see I can use Copilot from there. I want to write a short story of a mouse in a house. I'll show you in a minute why I wanted to show this to you. Ooh, that is not at all what I wanted. All right. Yes, just take a second. All right, so there's Copilot, right? I can start with the draft in Copilot. I just wanted to show this to you, right? Because it's actually quite valid. I need to book a flight to the US in Redmond, and would like to draft an email to my travel agent to request this. Now take a look at some of these options, because you'll notice, and this is again what I wanted to just outline for you, you can see that we can specify a tone here. So obviously, when we are doing this, we've got a system message that we are specifying, and we're giving context to this to the model to generate something that's direct or neutral, casual or formal. See how we've done that. Please ignore this one. I don't know why that is even there. But you'll notice that from a length perspective, we can make it short, medium, or long, right? So let's let's go with generate that so long. And this is what I refer to when I said about the ability to let the user iterate over your data, right? So you can see there, am I happy with this? Yeah, not really. Anything I want to change? Yeah, make it longer, for example, right? So I'm offloading the ability for the user to iterate around the model by making my user interface cater for that. And then I'm going like, ooh, this is maybe a little bit too long, right? So let me go back to the previous one. So in actual fact, whether you are using RAG or not, this is the kind of capability that you need to build into your applications to make folks actually iterate and start getting value, because it's not very often that they'll find that value initially, whether it is internal or whether it is external data, right? So, folks, to just wrap it up, we've touched on all these components now. I've got some, the source code for all of this is available under the OpenAI, documentation on our website. And let's see if there are a couple of questions. But if there aren't any questions, then by all means, I hope that this series was useful for you and that you got some value out of it. Let's see if there are any questions at this point.
So, hi, Johan. So we have a couple of questions. One is, there are a lot of offerings from Microsoft to develop RAG-based applications.
Correct.
Can you please explain which to use based on use cases?
Yeah, so I'm not going to be able to get into that, unfortunately, because this series specifically was about the OpenAI integration, right? But yes, 100% correct. There's I think altogether there's about 3 different options that you can use. Most of them integrate and make use of our search service to achieve some of those capabilities. But yeah, 100% correct. This series was focused on OpenAI, but there are also other components and other platforms that you can use to also build this sort of integration. So yeah, absolutely. I'm not going to go through them now, but yeah, absolutely, that is definitely possible. You can even bring your own machine learning model and do it from your own machine learning level if you wanted to do that. Absolutely. So I guess the short answer for that is, yeah, it depends what you're trying to achieve, right? If you're wanting to focus on OpenAI, then you'll use this mechanism that we specified now. If you're wanting to use some of the more consumer-driven tools, like and I'm using that in quotes, like the AI Studio, then yeah, you'll be able to do that. But again, you can also bring in your machine learning experts, and you can build these things from the ground up using our machine learning studio. So there's a bunch of options. Thanks for highlighting that. I forgot that. Can you explain which to use based on use cases? Yeah, so the use cases predominantly for us today was on OpenAI and opening up this from a development perspective. Some of the other tools like the AI Studio is not going to require you to write any code, right? So you can think of those more as low-code solutions, right? Think of Microsoft Flow and those sort of components, giving you some of these types of capabilities. But yeah, as I said, that we're essentially focused here on the OpenAI components. I'm building an app that uses both services as well, but I didn't find a way to bring information from the total of the documents prompts, like what is the total of leads? Is it possible to do? I'm not sure what you mean by that. I'm building an app that uses both services as well. Yeah, all right. The search and the OpenAI service, I guess. But I didn't find a way to bring information from the total of the documents. Are you meaning from the document corpus, I suspect? Prompt like, what is the total of leads? Is there, if that information, well, keep in mind that we are not going to aggregate that information, for example, right? So if there's a document that contains, maybe a number at the top and a number at the bottom of the document, it sounds to me like what you are doing is asking it to count those two numbers together and give you the result in the prompt. I'm not sure if that's what you mean. If that's what you mean, I guess it depends on the document sources. I've seen this work really, really well with Excel, where in Excel we ended up in Excel, it even goes as far as writing some of the formulas for you, right? And it's very accurate as to the fields and the actual data, so more data type operations. I'm not sure if the prompt side around that is going to be, I will start with Excel data. That's my suggestion. Is start with Excel data and see if that impacts your results at all. If not, I will possibly see if I can sort of normalize that data into a format that's a little bit more palatable from that perspective. Keep in mind, though, and this is important. I think it's Jason Kelly. Keep in mind that, and this is also actually quite important. So remember, you've got your data source, right? So in my case, this was a storage account, right? And then we had that enrichment process, right? So we enriched the data with those, with those items where we looked at, for example, the language, whatever else. So what I would recommend in that context of the number of leads is possibly write a separate Azure function that makes your calculation for you, and then create in your index where you've got your different index fields, create another index field there for the result of your function, maybe the total of all the sales orders or something like that, and see if you can actually write that value into it yourself, right? So let your Azure function look at the information, count together all the values, and return some sort of a result that maybe is called something like total or something like that. I hope that actually makes a little bit more sense, right? So if we're not getting to the data that you want during the indexing process, you can actually augment your data with not just our augmentation services, but even bring your own Azure functions, right? And do that yourself as well. So that snippet of text or chunk, you'll be able to analyze that yourself as well. Can we enhance the RAG to act like a LLM agent? I'm not sure if I'm not sure what you mean. Isn't that exactly what it is doing? Right? That I'm not sure what you wanted. I'm not sure what you wanted to do in that context, Nagaraj. I'm not 100% sure. You mean, do you want to use the AG to act like something that generates prompts, something like that? Is that what you're referring to? I'm not sure what you mean. You can type in the chat. I will read it. We have 2 minutes. So yeah, sorry folks. The idea here was not to show you the Microsoft RAG stack. The idea was to focus on OpenAI specifically. If you want us to have a series where we maybe cover all those RAG other items, let us know in the chat or speak to the Reactor folks, and they might be able to also do that. I like to perform action on the result. In your application, you can do whatever you want to do, right? Remember, your application is going to get the result, format that into a text box or put it somewhere. What you do with that result is entirely up to you. All right? So that depends on your application. I hope that answers your question. So what you do with the result, you don't have to display the result to the user. What you do with that result is entirely up to you. I know lots of people take that result and ask the model back to summarize the information and give the user a smaller result set. I've even seen that happen. Oh yeah, I see what you mean. Mm, yeah, I'm not sure what your data looks like, to be honest with you. I'm expecting it to be able to do something like that. So I'm not sure why it's not doing that. I expect it to do something like that, but keep in mind it's going to steer clear, just like the public facing model, right? Remember what the public facing model does when you ask it a question that it doesn't feel comfortable. When it doesn't feel comfortable, it goes like, yeah, that's not what I'm meant to be doing. I wonder if that's not what it's actually telling you, but not in as many words. Because what you're saying is, bring us the total. And maybe your business process is then going to be based on that total. And maybe it wasn't looking at all the information or whatever the case might be. It's not a transactional query engine, it's a language model. So you need to treat it accordingly, right? So, yeah, I don't think that's the idea to be able to do that. All right. Okay, cool, folks. That's the end of it. I hope that that was a valuable session and series for you folks. We can probably spend a lot more time and get deeper into some of these aspects and do more demos. But that's all we have for now. So I hope that was valuable, and I trust that you will have a great weekend and learn a bunch of things. Enjoy the rest of your afternoon.